In a wildlife rescue facility outside Johannesburg, a keeper walked into the nursery one morning to find something that made her question everything she knew about big cats. A small tortoise-shell house cat, weighing barely 9 pounds, was lying on her side nursing 4 kittens and 1 coal-black leopard cub. The cub was 3 weeks old, its eyes barely open, its tiny body already larger than the kittens surrounding it. Its mother had died from complications during birth, leaving it alone and failing fast. Every bottle-feeding attempt had failed. The cub refused to latch, crying constantly, losing weight by the hour. But this house cat, who had given birth 5 days earlier, had climbed over the dividing barrier, dragged the leopard cub to her nest, and began feeding it as if she'd planned it all along. What happened over the next 8 months would force scientists to completely rethink what a leopard learns, what a leopard becomes, and whether the wild can ever truly be taught by the domestic. This isn't folklore. This is documented, filmed, and scientifically analyzed, and the ending will leave you rethinking everything you believe about nature and identity. The facility keeper, 34-year-old Nadia Botha, had worked with big cats for over a decade. She'd seen orphaned cubs bottle-fed, surrogate mothers tried and rejected, cubs failing to thrive despite every intervention, but she'd never seen anything like this. The tortoise-shell cat, a stray she'd named Pepper, had been brought in the previous week after being found pregnant near a highway. Pepper was small, scrappy, with green eyes and a patchy coat of orange, black, and white. She'd given birth to 4 kittens in the nursery's corner enclosure. When the leopard cub arrived, orphaned and deteriorating, Nadia placed it in a separate basket 2 meters from Pepper's nest. She didn't expect anything. She was simply running out of options. At 3 a.m, facility cameras captured Pepper crawling over the low divider between enclosures, investigating the crying cub, then methodically dragging it back to her nest by the scruff of its neck. By dawn, the leopard cub was nursing alongside 4 kittens, its tiny black body pressed against Pepper's side like it had always belonged there. The immediate question was survival. Could cat milk sustain a leopard cub? Dr. Rowan Pretorius, the facility's chief veterinarian, analyzed the nutritional composition of domestic cat milk versus leopard milk. The fat and protein ratios were different, but compatible enough for survival, particularly combined with supplemental bottle feeding that the cub now accepted because its hunger had been initially satisfied by Pepper. The cub stabilized within 48 hours. Within a week, it was gaining weight steadily. But survival was only the beginning of the story. The more fascinating question was, what would this leopard become? The answer begins in brain development. Mammals are born with neural pathways that are remarkably unfinished. The brain's architecture is partially genetic, but largely sculpted by experience during critical developmental windows. For big cats, the first 6 months of life represent the most intense period of neural programming. Everything experienced during this window, sounds, smells, social interactions, behavioral cues, gets hardwired into the developing brain with unusual permanence. This leopard cub wasn't experiencing leopard life, it was experiencing cat life. The vocalizations of domestic cats, the grooming rituals of domestic cats, the play behaviors of domestic cats. Its mirror neurons, firing constantly during these early months, were mapping feline domestic behavior as its template for existence. Pepper wasn't just feeding the cub, she was programming it. Prolactin and oxytocin, the hormones responsible for Pepper's adoption of the cub, work bidirectionally. They didn't just make Pepper responsive to the cub, they made the cub chemically bond to Pepper. The scent of its primary caregiver was being encoded as mother, safety, home at a neurological level. The cub was becoming, in every way its developing brain could understand, a cat. This same mechanism explains seemingly impossible bonds documented around the world. In Brazil, a jaguar cub raised by a domestic Labrador retriever learned to retrieve objects, something no wild jaguar does. In India, a tiger cub orphaned and placed with a litter of domestic piglets learned to root in soil with its nose, a pig behavior, before their handlers realized what was happening. In Sweden, a wolf cub raised entirely by humans from birth became so thoroughly imprinted on human behavior that it could never be integrated with other wolves. Its brain had been written in human during the developmental window, and that writing proved nearly permanent. But here is what almost everyone gets wrong when they hear these stories. The assumption is that animals raised cross-species become confused, permanently damaged, or unable to function as their true selves. People assume the leopard raised by a house cat would be broken, unable to hunt, unable to survive, a tragic, half-wild creature with no place in either world. This assumption feels logical, but contradicts everything neuroscience has discovered about developmental flexibility. The brain isn't a recording that can only be written once. It's a layered document, written and rewritten by experience, with genetic programming providing the underlying template. A leopard learning cat behaviors is writing software over hardware that never changes. When circumstances change, when the environment shifts, when the genetic drives activate at their natural developmental triggers, the hardware asserts itself. The leopard can learn cat, then unlearn cat, because underneath the learned behavior, leopard was always there, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. As months passed, Pepper and her kittens demonstrated this beautifully by contrast. The kittens developed typical domestic cat behaviors, playing with loose objects, vocalizing with meows, showing comfort around humans. The leopard cub did the same initially. It meowed rather than chuffed. It played with toy mice. It groomed itself in perfect cat fashion, licking paws and cleaning ears with the same methodical strokes Pepper had demonstrated thousands of times. At 4 months old, however, something shifted. The leopard cub began exhibiting behaviors no cat possesses. It started dragging food items to elevated surfaces, a leopard instinct for protecting kills. It began climbing with a power and precision that stunned Nadia. Vertical surfaces, window frames, metal shelving units, scaling heights the kittens couldn't approach. Its vocalizations deepened from meows into something between a meow and a sawing cough, the beginning of the leopard's distinctive call. Genetics was beginning its conversation with environment, and environment was listening. Dr. Pretorius documented everything. The cub was code-switching, behaviorally, still grooming like a cat around Pepper, still responding to domestic cat vocalizations, still comfortable with human presence in a way wild leopards never are, but increasingly demonstrating leopard cognition when alone or exploring. It was, in neurological terms, bilingual, fluent in both cat and leopard, applying whichever code the situation seemed to require. At 6 months, Nadia made a decision that would determine the cub's future. She began introducing leopard-specific enrichment, large prey items, natural branches, climbing structures scaled for a growing leopard, recorded leopard vocalizations played at dawn and dusk. The cub responded immediately and powerfully to the vocalizations. It would freeze, ears forward, then begin producing similar sounds itself. It was as if a door in its brain had been unlocked from the inside. Pepper, meanwhile, was approaching the natural end of her surrogate role. Her kittens were weaning, her milk production declining, her maternal hormones normalizing. She still slept near the leopard cub, still groomed it occasionally, but she was no longer its primary world. The cub had grown to 40 pounds. Pepper still weighed 9. Their physical relationship had quietly shifted from mother-infant to something more like old companions who happened to share a space. At 8 months, the leopard cub was transferred to a larger facility with other young leopards. The transition took 3 weeks of gradual introduction. Initially, the cub approached other leopards with domestic cat body language, which confused them. Young leopards communicate through scent marking, body posture, and specific vocalizations that the cub hadn't yet calibrated. But within days, it was responding to and producing accurate leopard communication. The genetic blueprint was overwriting the cultural software with remarkable speed. 3 months after transfer, Dr. Pretorius visited for assessment. The leopard was indistinguishable in behavior from leopards raised by their own mothers. It hunted with textbook leopard technique, climbed and cached food correctly, communicated fluently with other leopards, and showed appropriate wariness of humans that wild leopards require for survival. The cat behaviors had retreated almost completely, surfacing only occasionally in grooming patterns that were slightly more methodical, more domestic cat-like than typical leopard grooming, a ghost of Pepper, written permanently into neural pathways formed during those first critical weeks. Nadia visited too, and documented what happened when she entered the enclosure for a brief, carefully supervised interaction. The leopard acknowledged her in a way it acknowledged no other human, a slow blink, a brief pause, a moment of stillness before returning to its business. The trust written by Pepper's care had extended, faintly, to the humans present during those early months. It wasn't tame, it wasn't unsafe, it was simply a leopard that had learned once that some humans were safe.
Pepper was adopted by a family living near the facility. She lived indoors, napping on radiators and ambushing toy mice, the most ordinary of cats. The family knew her history and kept a framed photograph on their mantel, Pepper nursing 4 kittens and 1 small black shape that would grow into something magnificent. 2 years after that midnight rescue, the leopard was transferred to a large wildlife reserve in Limpopo, South Africa, for monitored semi-wild rehabilitation alongside 2 other facility-raised leopards. Camera traps captured its progress over 18 months. It established territory. It hunted successfully. It avoided human contact with the caution of any healthy wild leopard. Dr. Pretorius published his findings in a peer-reviewed journal of animal behavior. His conclusion was precise. Cross-species maternal bonding during critical developmental windows produces measurable behavioral modification, but does not override a species-specific genetic programming when appropriate environmental triggers are provided. The leopard had been a cat. Then it became a leopard. Both were real. Neither was wrong. Here is the justice in this story. A leopard that had no right to survive did. A house cat's hormones created a bridge between the domestic and the wild that no human intervention could have engineered. And when that leopard walked into the African wilderness, it carried something unusual inside its neural architecture, a foundation of safety, a blueprint of care, written by a 9-pound tortoiseshell cat who climbed a barrier in the middle of the night because a baby was crying and her biology gave her no choice. The leopard didn't need to remember Pepper. It needed only what Pepper gave it, the first weeks of life that made all the other weeks possible. That is enough. That has always been enough. If Stories with the Smallest Creatures Saves the Largest move you, hit that like button and subscribe. Nature writes better stories than we ever could.